So again, back to Ruby in the cloud. We've got still modern application development, IaaS configuration, and orchestration. And then I put one in here which I see as, I call it the Internet of Things, and I'm not the one that calls it that. I just am regurgitating what I've heard other people say. But it's a trend that I'm seeing happen very, very quickly. And I think it will actually happen faster than mobile devices, to be honest with you. And it's this concept of all consumer devices and sensors. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So again, the consumer devices and sensors, what do I mean? Most people have a smartphone, whether it's iPhone or Android or another one. And it has GPS, right? And it has other sensors on it, accelerometers. And there used to be one, and then there's two, and now there's three. And you see a trend where there's going to be more and more sensors into these devices. There's the concept of app interaction, how you interact with all the apps that are running on your phone, on your smart device. And that's generating a lot of data. And whether it's a physical sensor or not, it's generating a tremendous amount of data, interaction data, that's about you. Things like the Fitbit or the Nike sensor, which obviously you don't need anymore because your iPhone is smart enough to do that. And the latest one that really kind of started to bring this home, at least for me, and I don't know how many people in the audience have seen this, is, of course, there's home and car automation, but it's this thing called a Nest thermostat. Anyone heard of the Nest thermostat and seen what that is? For those in the audience that don't know, a bunch of Apple engineers who were responsible for both the iPod and the iPhone went off and started to create a stealth company to develop the next new thermostat. What's interesting about the thermostat is that there is no fancy device, so to speak, in terms of what it looks like. Multiple devices talk to each other. They can actually do motion detection to figure out if you're actually in the room or not. They understand things like how fast it takes to heat up a room or cool a room down. They talk amongst each other, like I said. And so it's essentially a very intelligent sensor device and a very, very simple display. And the remote control, so to speak, or the intelligent display, is your smart device, your iPhone or your Android device. Now, right now, the Nest data that it collects, obviously, is a singleton. It's by itself. But you can imagine if the Nest thing could have access to your calendar, it could automatically figure out, you're going to be out of town. For those who understand that, in terms of the new Apple device and Siri, you could imagine talking to Siri to ask about the Nest device, to check your calendar, to make sure to turn the heat down if you're not going to be there. And so all of these types of applications, again, these sensors that are generating all these data, at least in my opinion, are ripe for things like mRuby or lightweight Ruby. And so when Matt announced that he was actually working on mRuby, I was actually very excited because I started seeing a trend where, being able to program in a language that you love, yet it being understanding of an embedded platform, I think is extremely powerful. So there's some trends and challenges. And this is, again, one person's point of view about what I've been witnessing over the last 2 to 4 years. I apologize if that's hard to read. But obviously there's multiple cores, and there's concurrency models that are quickly coming online. And so even one of the things that Matt's referenced in terms of Node.js, which uses V8's very, very fast engine, it's still single-threaded. It has an asynchronous model, so in other words, it actually can do what looks like multiple things at once with a callback mechanism. But even Ryan Dahl, who actually was a big Ruby fan before creating Node, realized that you need to use multiple cores. And so there's a concurrency model problem that needs to be very, very clean and very, very effective. And I noticed Matt's referenced that in terms of mRuby, of thinking about some sort of evented type system. And so I'm excited about that. Within app development, and again, for those in the audience, at least for me, been around as long as I have, there's never been a time in history when there's been more of an explosion of new languages coming on the scene. It's absolutely amazing. And to Matt's point where he says, mRuby probably won't challenge JavaScript in the browser. I think someone in the audience, said, well, Google's doing that with Dart. And they created a whole new VM from the ground up. There's things that are very, very influential from Ruby that are actually being affected within the landscape as well, like CoffeeScript. So for those who don't know CoffeeScript, it's a dialect that compiles down into JavaScript that has a lot of the Ruby syntax and elegance to it. And I believe even the designer of JavaScript said the next version of ECMAScript, which is going to take a lot of the cues from CoffeeScript, which essentially took the cues from Ruby. But we're seeing things where not only the applications are getting smaller, we're seeing this trend of JavaScript on both sides. And it's not necessarily whether or not you want to do JavaScript on both sides. You have to do JavaScript, at least currently in the browser. But it's enabling these interesting models where you're actually starting to challenge these things like multiple, model view controller paradigms. And there's a lot of innovation going on right now about, if you can do that, what does that look like? And so again, a trend and a challenge at the same time. Again, the language explosion. The app servers are shrinking. And so, again, this is a one-person opinion, but as you see these platforms become very, very rich, for example, Heroku and Azure and things like Cloud Foundry, where they take on a lot of the heavy lifting for you, you're not going to see these very, very big apps. You're going to see very small apps, in my opinion, that are tooled to do the exact function that they need to, stitched together under either a mobile app namespace or a URL namespace. And so I think that's going to be a trend that's going to continue. And this is the one where, actually at I think it was Ruby World a couple years ago, I gave a talk, and I gave a light bulb analogy, and everyone kind of looked at me and chuckled a little bit. And the only reason that I gave it was because of what I saw going on inside of Google. Where Google, had a mix of a CapEx, meaning how much things cost, versus OpEx, which is how much they cost to run. And they quickly essentially dropped CapEx, meaning they didn't care how much something cost to either build or get the resources to actually run it. All they cared about was how much it cost to run. And the light bulb analogy, which again I got laughed at, and I'm sure I'll get laughed at again, is I remember a time where I would buy the 30-cent light bulbs and I could care less. And then all of a sudden one day I was in, I don't know if it was Costco or Walmart or something like that, and I found myself looking at a $20 light bulb that was a CFL or an LED. Well, why was I doing that? The reason I was doing it is I wasn't necessarily caring about what it cost, the light bulb. It was caring about how much it actually cost to run the light bulb. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the way computers are built today and people are starting to go to these cloud platforms, and you ask yourself, what's the most expensive thing that we're probably going to be charged for? Right? You have a plethora of things. You have networking, disk, and CPU and memory. But anyone in this room who's actually bought a computer and sized the computer up, right? If you go to the next fastest processor, well, you get kind of dinged for that, right? You put in more disk, well, you get kind of dinged for that. You ever notice what happens is when you try to double the memory in your machine, in terms of how much how much cost goes up? And so one of the things, again, it's a trend and a challenge, is this is different than CapEx. So if you look at things like Node and Ruby and Java, again, I would actually say in terms of what Matt's is working on in mRuby, what's your bill for the same functionality on, let's say, Heroku? So let's say, there's a large Java app with lots of frameworks and things going on, and it takes 2 gig of memory, versus Ruby takes, let's say, 40 megs of memory, versus mRuby might take 12 meg of memory. And now all of a sudden you run that 7 by 24 by 365 for 10 years. And one of the challenges here is that if you look at, like, for example, the top dog in terms of infrastructure as a service, let's say Amazon, but you can look at others like Rackspace. Compute those models out and figure out what that is. So as much as I used to buy the 30-cent light bulbs and could care less, and found myself staring at the $20 light bulb, how can we ensure that the light bulb we're looking at is something that we really enjoy doing, like programming in Ruby? Thank you.